clear the dead weight out of this family. You can go first." My brother said it with a grin, leaning back in the chair I'd paid to reupholster, and my parents laughed like he'd told a joke they'd all heard before and still found funny. My mother dabbed her mouth with the napkin and added almost kindly, "Oh, sweetheart, don't look so wounded. The only useful thing about you is your bank account." Then she passed the gravy. I remember the gravy more than the words, honestly. The little dented silver boat I'd bought them 3 Christmases ago, the one that still had a coffee ring on the handle because nobody in that house ever washed anything properly. I watched it move from my mother's hand to my father's, and I thought, very clearly and very calmly, the way you'd note that it had started to snow, okay? My name is Wren Calloway. I'm the older of two, the daughter, the one who never made a scene. For 31 years, I had been the quiet machinery that kept the Callaways running. And that night, somewhere between the gravy and the second bottle of wine my father had bought on a card I was technically responsible for, the machinery switched itself off. I should tell you how I got there, because it didn't start with a dinner. It started a long time before, the way these things always do, in 1,000 small surrenders. Nobody bothered to write down. We grew up in Burlington in a brick bungalow my parents bought in the 90s when houses still cost something a regular family could carry. My father drove a delivery route. My mother did the books for a flooring company until she decided the stress wasn't worth it, which was around the time I turned 14 and started babysitting to buy my own school clothes. My younger brother was the son the rest of us orbited. He was charming, he was loud, he was forgiven for everything before he'd even finished doing it. When he flunked half of grade 11, my parents hired a tutor and called him a late bloomer. When I got a 96 in chemistry, my mother asked why it wasn't higher. I learned early that affection in our house was a transaction, and I learned which currency they accepted. Not feelings, not closeness, usefulness, so I became useful. I got the scholarship to Mac. I lived at home to save money. I finished my nursing degree and walked straight into a job at Joseph Brandt. The second I had a real paycheck, the requests began, and they never really stopped. The first one was small. My brother needed $400 for a deposit on an apartment downtown. "Just float me. I'm good for it." I e-transferred it that night and felt grown up, like I was finally contributing. He never paid it back, and I never asked, because asking would have made me the difficult one, and being difficult was the one thing I'd been trained my whole life to avoid. After that, it was a slope, and I was already halfway down it before I noticed I was sliding. My father's truck needed a transmission. My mother's dental work wasn't covered. My brother's brilliant business idea, a sneaker reselling thing, then a vending machine thing, then something with crypto I never fully understood, always needed seed money, and I was always the seed. By the time I was 28, I wasn't just lending money, I was infrastructure. I want to be honest about how that happened, because I think people imagine you'd have to be a fool to end up where I did, and I wasn't a fool. I was tired, and I loved them, and saying yes was so much easier than the fight that came with no. I was the primary account holder on the family phone plan, all 5 lines, because I had the best credit and the carrier gave a multi-line discount. The pre-authorized debit for my parents' property taxes came out of my checking account every quarter, because the year my father missed a payment and got a letter from the city, I'd quietly set it up to stop that from ever happening again, and then I just never turned it off. Their home insurance renewed on my visa. When my brother's landlord wanted a guarantor for the bigger apartment, the one with the parking spot he didn't need, I signed. When my parents refinanced and the bank wanted a cosigner on the home equity line of credit because their income on paper didn't support it, I signed that too, in a beige boardroom in Burlington, while the mortgage specialist slid me a pen and my mother squeezed my hand and called me her good girl. I had RSP contributions I skipped, a trip to Portugal I canceled, a man named Theo I dated for almost a year who finally asked me, gently, why I lived like I was supporting a household of 5 on a hygienist's wages, and I didn't have an answer that didn't sound insane out loud, so I let him drift away rather than explain. My TFSA sat nearly empty while I funded an arrest for my brother's kid that my brother bragged about at parties as though he'd opened it himself. None of them ever said thank you. That's the part that took me longest to understand. They didn't withhold gratitude out of cruelty. They genuinely didn't experience it as a gift. To them, I wasn't being generous. I was just functioning correctly. You don't thank the furnace for heat. You only notice it when it breaks. So, the dinner. It was my mother's idea. A Sunday roast to get everyone together, which usually meant somebody wanted something. We were at their place, the bungalow I'd helped reshingle the summer before, when the insurance I paid for, wouldn't cover the whole repair. My brother had brought his new girlfriend, who seemed nice and who I felt sorry for in advance. My father was 3 glasses in. My mother had made the roast and let me know, twice, that the cut had been expensive. The conversation got around to money the way it always did, sideways. My brother had lost his most recent job, something to do with creative differences, and he was floating the idea of moving back in with our parents, and my father was floating the idea that the basement would need finishing first, and somewhere in there, my brother decided to be funny. "You know what we should do," he said, gesturing with his fork. "Just trim the fat, get rid of the dead weight. Everybody in this family who actually does something stays. Everybody who just complains can go." He looked right at me when he said it, and then he laughed, and then came the line about me going first, and then my mother and the gravy and the useful thing about me being my bank account. And my father, wiping his eyes, telling me not to be so sensitive, that I knew it was true. I want to describe what happened inside me because it wasn't an explosion. I'd had explosions before. The kind that end with you crying in your car in a Tim Hortons parking lot and then driving home to apologize. This wasn't that. This was the opposite of an explosion. It was a door clicking shut in a quiet house. The noise of them kept going. My brother's girlfriend laughing nervously, my mother changing the subject to the dessert she'd bought, my father refilling his glass, and I just sat inside the quiet of that closed door and felt, for the first time in years, completely still. I set down my fork. I said, "Okay." My mother glanced over. "Okay, what, hon?" "Just okay," I said. And I stood, and I got my coat from the hook by the door, the hook I'd installed, and as I was zipping it up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a calendar reminder. I'd set it months earlier on a bad night, mostly as a kind of dare to myself, a little note from a braver version of me to whoever I'd be when it finally went off. I didn't even have to open it to know what it said. I just felt the buzz against my hip like a hand on my shoulder, and I smiled. And my brother caught the smile and didn't understand it. And that not understanding was the first genuinely satisfying thing I'd felt in that house in as long as I could remember. "You leaving?" my father said, half rising, more annoyed than worried. "We haven't even had the cake." "You're right," I said, "about me going first. Let's find out who's dead weight." And I left before the meaning of it could land, because the meaning was going to take a while to arrive, and I didn't want to be there when it did. The cold outside was clean and sharp, and it felt like the first full breath I'd taken in a decade. I drove home down the QEW with the radio off, and my hands were steady on the wheel, and that steadiness scared me more than rage ever had, because rage burns out. This wasn't going to burn out. This was just true now. I didn't sleep that night, but not the way you'd think. I wasn't crying. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and a cold cup of tea, and I made a list. And making it felt less like revenge and more like an inventory after a flood, finally counting what the water had taken. Here is what I had quietly become: the account holder on 5 phone lines, the guarantor on a lease, the cosigner on a home equity line of credit, with a balance that made me feel sick when I logged in and looked at it properly for the first time in over a year. The invisible source of property taxes, home insurance, a streaming bundle, my mother's gym membership she never used, and a standing $200 e-transfer to my brother on the first of every month that had started as just until things stabilized and had been running uninterrupted for 31 months. 31 months. $6,200, just there, just gone, into a man who'd suggested at dinner that I was the one who didn't contribute. I did the math on all of it, not the loans I'd never see again. I let those go, mentally. The way you let go of something heavy you've been carrying so long, you've stopped feeling your own arms. I added up only what was still actively bleeding out of my accounts every single month, the ongoing, the automatic, the things I had set up myself and forgotten, the way you forget a wound that's healed crooked. It came to a number that made me put the pen down and sit very still. I could have called them that night and screamed it. I think a younger me would have. But I'd spent my whole life being managed by people who knew exactly how to handle a scene, who could turn any outburst of mine into proof that I was the unstable one, the dramatic one, the ungrateful one. I wasn't going to hand them that. I wasn't going to give them anything they knew how to use. So I decided to do the one thing they had never once prepared for. Nothing loud at all. The calls started the next morning. My brother first, 2 voicemails before 9. The second one already irritated, as if I'd inconvenienced him by leaving his comedy routine. Then a text from my mother. Stop sulking and call your father. He's upset. My father upset. As though I were the one who'd done something. I went to work. I cleaned teeth and reassured nervous patients and ate my lunch in the staff room, and I felt the strangest distance from my own name, like it belonged to a woman I used to know and felt sorry for. By mid-afternoon, the tone of the messages had curdled. My brother showed up in the lobby of the clinic, which is its own kind of nerve, and stood there in his good coat with his arms crossed until I came out on my break. "What's your problem?" he said. "No hello." "I don't have a problem," I said. "I just stopped." "Stopped what?" "Carrying it." I watched something flicker behind his eyes, the first small crack in the confidence. All of it. The things you don't know I carry. "You're about to find out, and I think you're going to be surprised how much it was." "You're being insane," he said, but his voice had gone up half a register. "You can't just— Dad's counting on the line of credit. There's stuff coming out of that." There it was. Counting on. Not relying on me, not depending on me, counting on it, like a fixed value in a spreadsheet, like weather. I almost felt grateful to him for saying it so plainly. "I know," I said. I co-signed it. That's the thing about co-signing. The bank thinks of it as my debt too. "So I've been talking to the bank." "You'll regret this," he said. And he said it the way our father says things, low and certain. The family's favorite threat. And then he left with his phone already at his ear, and I went back inside and finished my shift. My father called that evening. No greeting, just— "Turn the e-transfer back on, and whatever you did with the taxes, undo it tonight." I looked at the photo on my fridge, an old one, me at maybe 9, smiling so hard it must have hurt, holding a fish I hadn't caught because my brother had wanted the picture with the bigger one. "No," I said. A silence on the line, brittle as ice over a puddle. "You think this teaches us something?" he said. I hung up before he could finish, because I wasn't doing it to teach them anything. I was past teaching. You teach people you still believe can learn. I want to be careful here because this is the part where it would be easy to make myself sound like a mastermind, and I wasn't. I was a tired woman with decent credit and a list, but I did the next part properly, methodically, the way I'd been trained to do everything, and there was a grim kind of peace in it. I started with the things that were simplest and cleanest, the things that were unambiguously mine to stop. The phone plan was in my name, so I called the carrier and ported my own number off the account, then gave the family 90 days notice that the plan would be canceled and they'd need to set up their own. That's not cruelty. That's just no longer being the account holder for 4 adults' phones. The streaming bundle, the gym membership, the standing e-transfer, those I canceled outright that same week because they were gifts I'd stopped being able to afford the moment they stopped being received as gifts. The taxes and the insurance were a little more delicate, because I didn't want to be the reason my parents' house got a lien for unpaid property tax. I'm not a monster, and a part of me, a part I'm still not proud of, still flinched at the idea of real harm coming to them. So I didn't just yank the pre-authorized debit and walk away. I sent my parents a registered letter, the formal kind, dated with a copy kept for myself, explaining in plain language that as of the next billing cycle, the property taxes and home insurance would no longer be drawn from my account, that I'd notified the city and the insurer to update the payment information, and that they would need to arrange their own payment to avoid penalties. I gave them the account numbers. I gave them the deadlines. I gave them more notice than they'd ever given me before, adding a new expense to my life. The line of credit was the hard one, and the part where my anger had to make room for a lesson I'd learned too late. You cannot simply remove your name from a debt you've co-signed. I know that now, intimately. The bank does not care about your family dinner. The lender holds the agreement, and as far as they're concerned, that balance is as much mine as theirs, forever, or until it's paid off. So I couldn't make the debt disappear. And I didn't try. What I could do was stop being the silent shock absorber for it. I made an appointment with the branch and sat down with a financial advisor, a calm woman about my mother's age who looked at the file and then looked at me with something I realized, with a small shock, was respect. I learned a lot in that beige little office. I learned that I'd been making the minimum payments on that line of credit out of my own account when my parents missed them, which they had been doing for almost a year, quietly, so the calls came to me and never to them. I learned exactly how exposed I was and exactly what I could and couldn't do about it. I couldn't walk away, but I could stop covering the missed payments. I could let the responsibility sit, fully and visibly, with the people who were actually drawing on the credit and let the bank's letters go to the address on the bungalow instead of being silently absorbed by me 3 suburbs away. I could protect my own credit by documenting everything, and I could refuse, finally, to be the invisible patch over their leak. It took me about 2 weeks to put it all in place. 2 weeks of phone calls and letters, and one afternoon with a paralegal a friend recommended, just to make sure I wasn't exposing myself by stepping back. I didn't tell my family I was doing any of it. I let the systems speak for me, because the systems were honest in a way nobody in my family had ever been. And then there was the lunch. My mother is a woman who believes in optics, in the staged gathering, in reminding everyone publicly of who belongs and who doesn't. So about 2 weeks after the dinner, with the cancellations starting to bite, she organized a family lunch at a restaurant on the lake, the nice one with the patio, and she invited me last, by text, the wording so casual it was clearly meant to make me grateful to be included at all. We're all getting together at 1 p.m. at the lakeside place. You should come. I went. Not to make peace, to watch. There's a particular clarity that comes when you stop hoping a thing will change, and I wanted to see them with that clarity, in the daylight with witnesses. They were all there, my parents, my brother, his girlfriend, an aunt and uncle I hadn't seen since a funeral. The performance started before the appetizers cleared. My father stood, glass in hand, the way men of his generation stand when they're about to make something everyone's problem, and he cleared his throat and said he wanted to address the elephant in the room. As some of you know, he said, looking around the table, but not at me. Our daughter has decided she's too good for this family. She's pulled away, cut us off, after everything. He let it hang. My aunt made a sympathetic noise. My brother, never one to miss a cue, jumped in. No warning, nothing. Just decided one day we weren't worth her time. My mother dabbed at a dry eye and said, to the table, I don't know where we went wrong with her. And somebody, I think the uncle, actually patted her hand. I sat there and felt the old reflex rise, the apology already forming, the urge to make myself smaller so the room would be comfortable again. And then I felt the door. The one that had clicked shut at that dinner, and I knew it was still closed, and I let the apology die in my throat. Since we're telling the story, I said, and the table went quiet because I never spoke up. Let's tell the whole thing. I took my phone out and set it on the table. I'd spent an evening putting it together, not to humiliate them, or that's what I told myself. Though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that wanted them to feel one fraction of what I'd swallowed for a decade. Bank statements. The standing e-transfer history, 31 entries, the same date every month. The property tax receipts in my name. The insurance renewals. The line of credit statements with the missed payments I'd covered highlighted in yellow. I'd added it all up into one figure, a single number, and I turned the phone so my father could see it, and then I slid it slowly down the table so everyone could. That's what cutting you off looks like in dollars, I said. Per year. That's what the dead weight was good for. Nobody laughed. My brother stared at the number like it was in a language he didn't read. My father's hand, the one holding the glass, started to tremble, just slightly, and he set it down. My aunt's mouth had come open. The girlfriend, to her credit, was looking at my brother with an expression I'd never seen anyone in that family receive, and it was disgust. You didn't raise me, I said quietly, just to my parents now, because the speech wasn't for the table. It was for them, and it was the only thing I'd say to them that mattered. You ran me. There's a difference, and I only just figured out which one I'd been. I picked up my phone, put on my coat, and left the lunch I'd been invited to last, and the lake outside was gray and beautiful, and the air smelled like rain coming, and I drove home, and I did not cry. The collapse, when it came, didn't come all at once, the way I'd half feared and half hoped. It came in slow motion over weeks, in small concrete failures. My brother's apartment was the first domino I heard about, secondhand, through a cousin. With the e-transfer gone and me no longer floating him, he couldn't make rent, and because I'd given the leasing company formal notice that I would not be renewing as guarantor when the term came up. Another thing you learn, that being a guarantor isn't necessarily forever, that there are end dates and you can decline to re-up. He had to find someone else to vouch for him, and there was no one because everyone who'd ever vouched for him had been me. My parents got a letter from the city about the property taxes, the same kind of letter that had started all of this years ago, except this time it didn't quietly route itself to me and get paid before anyone noticed. The home insurance lapsed for 11 days before my mother, in a panic, figured out how to set up her own payment. The line of credit went to collections on the missed portions, and I watched my own credit score with the vigilance of someone guarding the one exit, and I made sure, through the paralegal and the bank, that my exposure was documented and contained. It cost me. I won't pretend it didn't. Stepping out from under a debt you co-signed is not free, and I'm still cleaning up the edges of that line of credit to this day. And every dollar of it is a tuition payment for a lesson I should never have had to learn. Never, ever sign your name to something you don't control. The calls changed character somewhere in there. The rage drained out of my brother first, and what was left underneath it was small and frightened. He stopped demanding and started asking, "How did you even do all that?" he said once on the phone, and there was no accusation in it, just a kind of bewildered awe, a man discovering that the floor he'd been standing on his whole life was actually a person. My parents stopped hosting the gatherings they could no longer afford. The bungalow went up for sale. I found out from a listing a coworker forwarded me without knowing what it was. My childhood house in 22 photographs. The reshingled roof, the hook by the door. They were downsizing. The description said, "Cozy starter home, great bones." My father asked to meet, eventually. We sat in a coffee shop in Burlington that he used to love, and he looked older than I'd ever seen him, smaller in his chair, his hands around the cup like he was cold. "You could have warned us," he said. "I did," I said, "for about 10 years. You just didn't think I'd ever actually stop." He looked into his coffee for a long time. "No," he admitted, "we didn't. That was it. Not sorry, not even close to sorry." Just the quiet confession that they had built their lives on the certainty that I would absorb whatever they threw at me forever, and that the only thing that had truly shocked them was discovering there was a limit. My brother came in halfway through, late as always, and he didn't sit beside our father the way he always had. He took the chair across from me, and he folded his hands like a kid in trouble, and he said, "I really didn't know how much it was." I swear I didn't. And the worst part, the part that actually hurt, was that I believed him. He hadn't been cruel on purpose. None of them had. They just never once bothered to look at the machinery. Because the machinery worked, and you don't look at things that work. I paid for my own coffee, only mine, and I left them there. That should be the end, and for a long time I thought it would be. But there's one more thing, and it's the part I'd want anyone watching their own family do this to them to hear most, so I'll tell it plainly. The story they told at that lunch, the one where I cut them off and collapsed into bitter loneliness, the cautionary tale of the ungrateful daughter, it didn't come true. That's the twist nobody in my family saw coming, least of all me. I didn't fall apart without them to take care of. The opposite happened. With the e-transfer gone and the phone plan gone and the property taxes and the insurance and the gym and the streaming and the slow constant hemorrhage of it all sealed off, I had money for the first time in my adult life. Real money. I maxed my TFSA. I started the RRSP I'd skipped for years. I finally took the trip. Not Portugal, I'd let that one go, but somewhere new. The kind of thing the old me would have canceled to cover someone else's emergency. I ran into my mother about a year later, in a bookstore on a rainy Saturday, the kind of small city coincidence that's bound to happen eventually. She looked startled to see me, and I understood, in the half second before she spoke, exactly what she'd expected. She'd expected me diminished, worn down, apologetic, finally ready to come back to my old place in the family machine, sheepish about the whole episode now that I'd surely learned I couldn't survive without them. "You look well," she said, and she couldn't keep the surprise out of it. "I am well," I said, and I was. I was buying a novel for a long weekend up north with a friend, a real friend, the kind I'd never had time for before. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even triumphant. I was just done. She waited. I watched her wait. She was waiting for me to offer something, a coffee, a phone number, a crack in the door, a way back to the old arrangement dressed up as reconciliation. I'd have given it to her once. I'd have given anyone anything once. I gave her nothing. I said it was good to see her, which was a small lie, and I went to the till and bought my book and walked out into the rain, and I felt, walking to my car, the lightest I have ever felt in my life. What they lost was never the money. They could have replaced the money. People do when they have to, when the safety net finally refuses to catch them and they learn they can stand. What they lost was the certainty. The deep, unexamined comfort of knowing that no matter what they said or did, no matter how small they made me at the dinner table, there would always be someone quietly behind them, paying the taxes, covering the line of credit, absorbing the cost of being them. That certainty was the real thing I'd been giving them all those years, and it was the one thing I finally took back. I went home that day and I deleted the last shared folder off my drive, the one with all the statements and the spreadsheets and the highlighted yellow rows, the archive of a decade spent being useful to people who'd mistaken my silence for endless supply. I didn't need it anymore. I poured a glass of wine, and I sat by the window of the apartment that is only my name on the lease, and I watched the lights come on across the city, each one holding itself up. I wasn't deadweight. I never was. I was the thing holding the whole structure up, and they only learned what I was worth by finding out, one cold check at a time, exactly what it cost to live without me. For a long time, I believed the kindest thing I could do was keep saying yes. Every transfer, every co-signed paper, every quiet payment I made felt like love at the time. What I couldn't see, sitting at that dinner table while my brother called me deadweight, was that I'd been teaching them, year after year, exactly how to treat me. People learn what we allow. I'd shown my family that there was no bottom to what I'd absorb, and so they kept reaching for more. Not because they were monsters, but because I'd built a world where reaching cost them nothing. The dinner didn't come out of nowhere. It was the harvest of 10 years of seeds I planted myself, one unspoken yes at a time. I think the thing I'm proudest of isn't that I stopped, it's how I stopped. I had every reason to burn it all down in one cruel night, to yank the property taxes and let the letters from the city pile up, to wreck them the way the line about my bank account wrecked something in me. I didn't. I sent the registered letters. I gave the deadlines. I made sure no one's house was actually in danger, because the person I wanted to be on the other side of this couldn't be someone who'd taken a shortcut through harm. Doing the right thing slowly, when the wrong thing would have felt so much better, so much faster, was the hardest part, and it's the part I'd want anyone to copy. But being decent wasn't enough on its own. I had to be clear-eyed too. I had to sit at my kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and actually look at the numbers I'd spent years refusing to look at, to understand what a guarantor really owes and what a cosigner can and can't undo. The advisor in that beige little office taught me more in one afternoon than my family taught me in 3 decades, because she made me see the machinery I was trapped inside. You can't escape a trap you won't let yourself see. And then, knowing the right thing and seeing the truth, I still had to do the unbearable part, which was hold the line while they cried and raged and called me at all hours and told the whole table I'd abandon them. Standing steady through that, when every instinct I'd ever trained screamed at me to apologize and crawl back into my old place, took something I didn't know I had until I needed it. I'm not bitter now. I water my own plants, I pay my own taxes, and there's only one name on my lease. The lights across the city come on each night, every one of them standing on its own, and so, finally, am I.